watching the Mystical Green Beanie.
Hey, what's going on, dudes and dudettes? I am the Mystical Green Beanie. Alright, so I did a review for the first two Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, and I gotta be honest, those were horrifying to do. Because I know how beloved those films are, and, well, I don't exactly have the most popular opinion on those films, and don't hold them in such high regard. Regardless of your opinion on Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2, however, I think we can all agree that Spider-Man 3 is just total ass. Right? Like, this is just the bad one. And I'm probably showing my cards a bit prematurely here, but this is the worst out of the six for me. Like, the worst. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Nothing, okay, maybe not nothing, but very little of this film is palatable. Oif. Okay, so just like the last film, we're going to take a look at these characters and where they are in relation to the previous film. God give me strength. Let's just get this over with. Starting off with our title character, we have Peter Parker Spider-Man, portrayed yet again by Tobey Maguire. And the man tries. He really tries. And in fact, I think I'll go as far to say that he gives the best performance that he possibly can in this movie. And I actually kind of liked him in this one. And I'm not sure if that's because the rest of the movie is so bad, or if Tobey Maguire finally figured out how to play this very unique interpretation of Peter Parker. But he sells it. First of all, this is both a Peter Parker and a Spider-Man that I can buy as the jokey, silly Spider-Man, and the down on his luck but begrudgingly optimistic Peter Parker. And, well, that's it actually. Beyond the superficiality of the performance and some of the writing, I think the character arc is kind of cool. On paper. But in execution, it's messy and stupid and all over the place. Especially once we bring in the black suit. And I appreciate the concept of it all. Peter's life is finally in a good place, or, as good as it'll get for Peter Parker. But then things start to fall apart as he and MJ start to go through a rough patch. And he finds out that Uncle Ben's killer is still at large, and he's a crazy supervillain now. And the tension between he and Harry finally comes to a head as Harry becomes a supervillain himself and starts attacking Peter. And the already tense emotions he's feeling on top of getting the black suit, which is basically this movie's allegory for substance abuse in the face of hitting your lowest point, is a nice cherry on top. But much like Spider-Man 2, actually way worse than Spider-Man 2, these plot lines don't come together cleanly. In fact, they don't come together at all. Plus, if you're gonna have an arc where Peter Parker grows cocky and too big for his britches and has to humble himself in the end, why not give him the symbiote suit earlier in the film? As it is, he doesn't get blacked until an hour into the movie, and by then, we've already had several scenes where Peter's jackassery screws him over. And I just think that if he wears the symbiote for the majority of the film, you can do an interesting thing narrative-wise where we experience the highest of highs with him wearing it, but once we get towards the end of the film, Peter starts to experience the lowest of lows before ultimately hitting rock bottom. In this case, Mary Jane being rock bottom.
The pinned hand is strong with this one.
Anyways, speaking of the black suit, I really like Tobey Maguire's performance as Black Suit Spider-Man and Peter Parker. I mean, it's silly and stupid, but so is this movie. So it weirdly fits within the context of this film. And Peter is really bad at reading people. Like, I get that part of this film's arc for Peter is that he's supposed to be oblivious to everyone else's problems, especially MJ's, even though she refuses to open up to him and tell him what's really going on and why she's angry and sad. In fact, you know what? That brings us to the next character. Mary Jane Watson, played yet again by Kirsten Dunst. And she is absolutely awful in this movie. She's a toxic, insecure, selfish, self-centered, shallow, emotionally manipulative little shit. In other words, her character hasn't really changed since the last film. And none of this is Kirsten Dunst's fault. If anything, she's just doing the best she can with what she's given, but what she's given is terrible. Mary Jane is dating this guy who, though painfully oblivious, loves her more than anything in the world. For reasons unbeknownst to me, or anyone else with a shred of dignity for that matter. And all she does is bitch at him. Now, to be fair, when we meet MJ in this film, she's already been established as a very insecure person in the previous 2 installments, and in the beginning of this movie, she gets nuked by critics for her performance in her latest musical. And on top of that, she gets replaced. Like, fired and replaced the very next night. And nobody from the casting department told her, which is very unusual because typically the lead actor or actress wouldn't be recast after opening night due to bad reviews, and if, by some horrible chance, that were to happen, either that actor or actress would be contacted immediately before any changes were made to the cast. But, yeah. Anyways, MJ is under a lot of stress, and she does exactly what you'd think this version of the character would do, and she takes her anger out on Peter. Even when he tries to help her and empathize with her, she just snaps at him, and from the way she freaks out, it kinda seems like she wants his career as Spider-Man to torpedo like her Broadway career has, which is not only extremely petty and fucked up, but is also really confusing continuity-wise, because in the first 2 films, she was bending over backwards to be an actress. Not a singer, an actress. And all of the critiques she received were commenting on her singing ability. So, why is she worried? Her singing career might be DOA, but her acting career would be just fine. God, the more I think about this character, the more I hate her. Moving on, we have James Franco's Harry Osborn, who's not only no longer best boy, but also has a really nonsensical character arc in this movie. Wow, that was weird. So, in the beginning of this film, Harry's finally taken up the mantle of the new Goblin. He fights Peter in this really dynamic action sequence, but I'll talk more about that later. And the fight ends with Harry taking a bump on the head and losing his memory. Can I just skip to the 3 films after this, please? No. Okay. I will say, even though Harry having an amnesia plot is one of the cringiest things to come out of this movie on paper, James Franco not only does the best he can with it, the dude elevates the material, and almost makes you forget how terrible it actually is. And I've heard that this was the performance that made people fall in love with him as an actor, and I get it. I mean, for me it was Pineapple Express, but I can totally see someone falling in love with him in this movie. He's absolutely great.
How's the pie?
So good.
That said, his performance doesn't change the fact that the character still sucks, and how, after he gets his memories back, he goes back to being evil, and it's a light switch moment.
Whack.
But I'm the edgelord because I don't like it. Fucking Christ. But don't worry, because after Harry gets annihilated by Peter's BBC, he becomes a good guy. And, after a change of heart, when MJ gets kidnapped, again, for like the 3rd time in 2 canonical years, and helps Peter because reasons, he dies. Just like his father. Oof. Then there's Eddie Brock, played by Topher Grace, and for what they're going for, he's not bad. But this is another case of the actor elevating the script and doing the best they can with what they're given. So, in this movie, Eddie Brock is the dark mirror of Peter Parker. He's a skeezy photographer who takes pictures of Spider-Man and lies about how he gets them. Unlike Peter Parker, who's an honest photographer who takes pictures of Spider-Man and lies about how he gets them. Wait. Also, Eddie is kind of a creep because he tells everybody that he's dating Gwen Stacy, but according to Gwen, they only had coffee. But not coffee, like they had croissants and shit, but that's it. And when Eddie gets called out for bringing the Daily Bugle fake pictures of Spider-Man by Peter Parker, who's a totally upstanding citizen who doesn't lie about where he gets his pictures of Spider-Man from, and later sees Gwen hanging out with Peter at a jazz club, because, you know, New York is so small that something that coincidental could have totally happened, he goes to church, and, I shit you not, begs for God to kill Peter Parker. Yup. And then he becomes Venom, kidnaps MJ, has a final battle with Peter, and then he dies. So, yeah. And I'm not saying anything new here when I say this, but wow, what a waste of Venom. And it's not even like this film has a bad concept for repurposing the character. It's just executed terribly. Next up we have Sandman by Thomas Hayden Church, who's legitimately a good actor, but you wouldn't know it based off this movie. But again, this guy wasn't given anything to work with. And this movie really wants me to feel bad for this character and his sick daughter, and I don't. I really don't. Because Flint Marko is literally the dumbest person in this franchise. Like, out of all the Spider-Man films to this point, he is the dumbest character presented. Because his whole shtick is that I'm not a bad guy. I just do bad things because I have a sick daughter. Literally, the How It Should Have Ended sketch is his character in a nutshell. And to make matters worse, every horrible thing he does, that the movie wants me to feel bad for him for, is completely avoidable. Like, any human being with more than 3 brain cells would have avoided all the mistakes that he makes, which make him out to be the bad guy. Like, sure, you have a sick daughter, and the only option you feel you have is resorting to robbing banks. That's an interesting and somewhat compelling motivation. But here's the thing. You have superpowers. If you truly didn't want to cause anyone harm, just rob banks at night when no one's there so you don't have to put people in harm's way. And maybe don't turn into a giant sand monster and hijack trucks in the middle of the afternoon, which then leaves a path of destruction in your wake. And the big one that hits me is how he kills Uncle Ben. Uncle Ben is literally killed because even after Flint Marko decides he's not gonna rob this man, he keeps his finger on the trigger and still aimed at the man. Like, I mean, it's so frustrating how stupid he is. And I don't see anything remotely sympathetic about this guy. He's really the most unsympathetic character in this movie. And as I mentioned previously, Gwen Stacy is in this movie, and she's played by Bryce Dallas Howard. And, well, she's the only character in this film who isn't a terrible person besides Aunt May. Like, if this franchise continued, she would have been a wonderful replacement for MJ, and that's it. That's all I got. And then there's the supporting cast from the previous 2 films. J.K. Simmons returns as J. Jonah Jameson, and he's still just as brilliant as ever. Rosemary Harris is still great as Aunt May. The actor and actress who play Mr. Ditkovich and his daughter are wonderful. And there's even a small little scene between them and Peter that really makes me love Mr. Ditkovich as a character. Dylan Baker returns as Dr. Connors to cock-tease us for a role that he'll never play, and he's a joy to watch despite some of the dialogue being not that great. And if there's anything left to say about the acting in this movie, it's that nobody does a bad job. In fact, most of the cast is doing all they can with what they're given. And speaking of which, let's talk about the story. If, that's what we're going to call it. So, this movie takes place about 6 months after Spider-Man 2. Everything is going fine in Peter's life. He's finally got the girl of his dreams. He's got a steady job. He's doing well in school, despite some random jackass who likes to use a dental mirror, of all things, to distract him in class. Dude, I don't know. But I do think that it's an interesting idea for this film's opening to be a direct contrast to the previous film's opening, in which literally everything that could go wrong in his life does go wrong. Anyways, Harry has started his transformation into becoming a supervillain, and MJ's career on stage is still in its prime. But things start to go south after Harry confronts Peter and his civilian guys as the new Goblin, and, after they have a tussle through the city, Peter gets the upper hand, but after seriously injuring him, he takes him to the hospital, which is this film's first mistake. The whole amnesia plot reeks of daytime soap opera bullshit. What I think would have worked better is if the whole amnesia concept was a fake out by Harry, in which he's just messing with Peter and MJ the whole time. That way you can still have your do the twist scene between he and MJ. And while we're talking about Harry, I still think the choice to make him the new Goblin is just weird. He looks like an X Games contestant. I don't see why he didn't use one of the Goblin costumes, which was already there, or one of the gliders, which looks way cooler than a flying snowboard. Although I will say, the energy sword is a nice touch. It's a bit random, but I thought it was pretty cool. But just the whole concept of the new Goblin is weird to me. Anyways, that's plot 1, so let's look at plot 2, which is the Sandman plot. So, the whole idea behind Sandman in this movie is that, as it turns out, he's the real killer of Uncle Ben. Now, this isn't actually a bad idea. I think making the death of Ben Parker an unfortunate accident is potentially really cool and adds to the tragedy that much more. The problem is that, as I've mentioned previously, Flint Marko is a dumbass. And the movie wants me to feel sympathy for the guy, but I just don't. Plus, he teams up with Venom at the end of the movie, and that makes no sense with the character that Sam Raimi attempts to establish in this film, because Sandman's whole thing is that he just wants to get money for his daughter. He doesn't want to hurt anyone. I guess if anyone was brave and or cunning enough to defend this movie, they'd say, "Sir, it's secretly brilliant because violence and hatred begets more violence and hatred, and what goes around comes around. And it's poetic that Sandman gets he keeps getting caught in a web, if you will, of misunderstandings, and how he reacts to Spider-Man after Spider-Man viciously attacks him. It's all poetic, and that's why this movie's brilliant, and that's the big picture." But yeah, no. If anything, I think the Sandman-Venom team-up makes more sense in the Spider-Man 3 video game, where Venom kidnaps his daughter and blackmails him into fighting Spider-Man. But yeah, I just don't like Sandman in this movie. Then there's the Venom plot, and again, neat idea, and I don't dislike it. I actually enjoy it quite a bit, to be honest. But it just feels like it doesn't gel with the rest of the film as well as it should. But I do like Topher Grace as Eddie Brock, where, he's the dark mirror of Peter Parker, and like I said, the whole thing with Venom is just a big wasted opportunity. As for the Peter Parker-Mary Jane relationship stuff, it's really bad. Like, take everything that I said about them and their relationship in my retrospective of Spider-Man 2, and just follow up on that. She's a bad girlfriend. She's emotionally manipulative, she's self-centered, and she's quick to let her personal insecurities get the best of her and lash out at Peter when he's just trying to help. She's a really unsympathetic character. And throughout the film, I found myself wishing that Peter would wake up and realize that every other female character in his harem was a better fit for him. But he keeps running back to MJ because, let's face it, Raimi's Peter Parker is a submissive bottom bitch boy who would rather be humiliated by his toxic, abusive, and spiteful, emotional, and maybe sexual, but I highly doubt it, handler whom he mistakenly calls a girlfriend. And the whole Gwen Stacy subplot was dumb, and inadvertently hurts the audience's supposed connection to Mary Jane because she's just a far more likable love interest and has more charm and, well, humanity than MJ does in this entire trilogy. Now, this film is heavily flawed. In fact, I think saying that it doesn't work on any conceivable level is generous. That said, I do think that there's a way to tie all these plot lines together. But, at this point, it would basically force you to rewrite the entire film. Because if you want Sandman and Venom in this movie, Because if you want Sandman and Venom in this movie that's supposed to wrap up the Harry versus Spider-Man plot, then I'd go full evil mastermind with it and make it so that Harry has been building supervillains for Peter to fight for the past 6 months, and Sandman is just one of them. And Flint Marko's whole thing is that he's a death row inmate with a sick daughter, like in the movie, and Harry promises to back his daughter's treatments if he kills Spider-Man. Plus, the symbiote would be a meteorite recovered by Oscorp, but Harry has no idea what to do with it, and during the fight between he and Peter, instead of that happening in the streets of Manhattan, it goes down in the Oscorp R&D lab, and the meteorite gets damaged and the symbiote escapes onto Peter's clothes. Or something. Dude, I don't know. I'm trying to make sense of it. But it's really hard to do. Then there's one more tiny little fanboy issue that I have with this film. And it's that, yet again, this is a Spider-Man movie where the entire city loves Spider-Man and revolves around Spider-Man. And again, here's my issue with it. Spider-Man is New York's most controversial superhero. Right? Generally speaking, people either hate or don't know how to react to Spider-Man because he gets a lot of bad press from the news. And while he does eventually develop a special relationship with the people of New York, he never becomes its greatest hero like Superman. There are no parades held in Spider-Man's honor. Nobody is ever willing to present Spider-Man with the key to the city. And in this movie, Spider-Man is treated like the freaking Flash. He practically has a holiday centered around him. And it's just really annoying how a really simple concept gets lost in this entire trilogy. Anyways, aside from the story, I thought that Christopher Young did a great job on the score. The visual style of this film is really good. Bill Pope did a great job as the director of photography. Speaking of which, the fight choreography was spot on in this film. My favorite action sequence has to be the one where Peter and Harry have that big fight in the beginning of the movie. Although, I will say that the unfortunate part about that is that it's the best action sequence in the entire film, and it's the first one. So, that's not great. But the action was never boring, and that's good. And the last thing I want to bring up is the costuming. I really like the designs in this film. Well, except for the new Goblin, but yeah. I love the black suit in this movie. I wish they did the classic black suit because I love that design, and it's my second favorite Spider-Man costume behind the Ben Reilly Spider-Man suit. But I like what they do with it here. I also really like the Venom design. I know that some people have problems with it, but I like it within the context of this universe. And I appreciate how Sam Raimi tried to do the character practically as opposed to making him a CGI monster. Although, to be fair, I didn't dislike when they made him a CGI monster in his own standalone film. And Flint Marko's Sandman looks straight out of the comics. Like, he's really cool. Unfortunately, that's the only good thing about him in this movie, but still, really cool looking. But yeah, guys, that was Spider-Man 3. I'm gonna be honest with you. I procrastinated on doing this review. Like, this is the longest I've put something off in recent years. I did not want to do this. Like, I thought I wanted to, but then I actually started watching Spider-Man 3, and guys, this was hard. You know, this was painfully hard. I'm not asking for sympathy likes, but actually no, I am. Please like this video. Please validate my efforts because this was mentally and emotionally exhausting. Anyways, what about you? What are your thoughts on the review? What are your thoughts on the movie? Let me know down below in the comment section. And yeah, guys, thanks for watching, and as always, until next time, adios nachos, adios.